Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cost Action Sustain webinar series. My name is Syed Ishaq Deliri, and I'm supporting the organization of today's session, which is hosted by Working Group 3. We are pleased to have two excellent speakers with us today, Dr. Bilalova and Dr. Tiwari, who will share their research on the value of ecosystem planning and adaptation. Please feel free to use the chat for questions. We will have a short discussion after each talk. Now I would like to hand over to Ms. Zanepa Dafko, WG3 leader, to introduce the speakers and officially begin the scientific session. Ms. Zanepa?
Thank you, Syed. Thank you, Syed. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Working Group 3 webinar of Cost Action Sustain, and thank you for being with us today. Today's session will bring together two thought-provoking case studies, actually, that explore ecosystem-based responses to environmental challenges, that is ranging from climate extremes such as floods and droughts to coastal erosion through participatory approach and the evaluation of ecosystem services. While the context differ, both presentation provides insights that can enrich our reflection on adaptive planning and ecosystem management in vulnerable areas, including salt-affected landscape, which are at the core of our Working Group 3 focus. So today we are pleased to welcome Dr. Shahana Bilalova, who will present her work on co-creating adaptation pathways in Geul Basin, highlighting co-creation processes with stakeholders in the face of extreme floods and droughts. And the second speaker will be Dr. Ananya Tiwari, who will share findings from her study on ecosystem service evaluation of coastal dunes in northeast West Ireland, focusing on nature-based solution for coastal protection and the multiply benefits provided by dune ecosystem. So each talk, as Syed mentioned, each talk will be followed by a short question and discussion. So feel free to use chat or to raise your hand. So let's begin with our session. Dr. Bilalova, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Zanepa and Syed and Kate, for inviting. I will quickly share my screen now. I hope you can see my full screen now. Great.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to be here. And while thinking, I thought it would be very nice maybe to discuss a little bit about the experience of our project, Green Adaptive Extremes, especially on the focus of co-creation process and what the project is about, and also what we have learned so far. That would be probably valuable for us to exchange on and learn from each other's experience. So I'm a postdoc at Vrije Amsterdam, and I'm part of a Green Adaptive Extremes project. And the project is actually a part of a Water for All partnership. And we are working together with two other partners, one in Germany, in Bonn, which are working on the Earth Basin, and one in Italy, Cima Foundation, working on Dora Baltea Basin. And a little bit on the project. So the project is very much, let's say, inspired by the flood and drought extremes going on in the Europe, and which the situation is about to increase with the increasing climate change. And the main emphasis of the project is to work closely with the stakeholders in these three highly flood and drought-prone European river basins, Dora Baltea in Italy, Earth Basin in Germany, and Geul Basin, which I'm also working on, in the Netherlands, and to co-create adaptation pathways to respond to the flood and drought extremes. And what is the objective of the project? So the project very much focuses on nature-based solution and as a response to flood and drought extremes. And the main, let's say, key theme in the project is the co-creation, and as a way to address these extremes and to design pathways to safeguard water security, as well as strengthening resilience and nature conservation in the rise of this increasing extremes in the basins. And the project has very many steps, and it all starts from the co-creation of the visions for resilient basin futures. So the main idea is in all three basins, we come together with the stakeholders and we start from a co-creation of the visions, which allow us to understand what the stakeholder really want to see in the basin. So it's not really top-down process, but rather bottom-up, I would say. And from there, then the next step is that we are together with the stakeholders, identify what are the actually current and future multi-risks in the basin that is threatening these visions of the stakeholders. So what are the ecological, social, and natural causes and consequences or risks that is related to flood and droughts that is threatening the visions of the stakeholder. And once we identify the risk, then we move towards to designing the adaptation pathways. So there are also several elements that I will touch upon, but we first of all identify what kind of adaptation options there could be. And then once we have adaptation options, we combine it together with the visions and the risk knowledge, and then we design the pathways that would help us to address the extreme flood and droughts, but also at the same time address the visions of the stakeholders. And then one of the last steps of the project is then once we have the adaptation pathways, we evaluate them to see how they actually deliver in terms of not just the risk reduction benefits, but also co-benefits. So we are also very interested in to understanding what kind of indirect benefits we can get from these pathways. Let's say what are the justice issues that arise, or what are the economic and social benefits that we can get from that. So there are also lots of layers that we are trying to look at. And based on this, then we are coming up with the recommendations for the governance. So what kind of governance gaps are out there? So that's what we analyze. And then together with the stakeholders, we are trying to come up with a recommendation for the enhanced governance options. So these are a little bit on a nutshell of the project. And since I talked about the co-creation, so I don't want to take it as granted that everyone knows what the co-creation is, because in the literature also there are lots of terms used for defining co-creation. So in our project, we understand co-creation as more like a collaboration between science, technology, and society, that we transform the inputs such as data, knowledge, and ideas into product and services that the stakeholders can use. And also it has another side of the coin, let's say, which also helps the society to understand about the science, and for us, the scientists, to understand the public needs. So it has a lot of directions in the co-creation process. And as I said, there are lots of terms that is also used as a synonyms in the literature. So some people use it as a co-production or co-design. Sometimes it's used as also transdisciplinarity or science policy interferes or knowledge brokering. So there are also lots of terms that is used, but in our project, we are using the co-creation as a main term. And also how we see the co-creation. So we basically rely on the 5 key, let's say, pillars that starting with the active engagement. So once we talk about the co-creation, we really want to see the active engagement. So we don't want to be just having the stakeholders being like a passive recipients, but rather the active participant that they shape the whole process and the whole research outcomes. And the next thing is the constructive interaction and coordination direction. So we want the results to be very targeted. So they are more solution oriented. So sometimes we as a researcher have an idea about how the world should be, but it's not really aligning with what the people living in that area want to have. So we are trying to have this coordination with the stakeholders and to align the research process in line with what they really need, what they want to see, what are the real issues there. And the flexibility is also key in the co-creation process, because the things are not as always as we want to have. And there are always, let's say, need for adaptation throughout the process. So we shouldn't be very scared of revising the process. Another key is inclusiveness. So while talking about inclusiveness, I would like to also emphasize that it's very easy to fall into the tokenism, let's say, pitfall that sometimes we are trying to have everyone on board, but it's not really participation. So it's very important that we are intentional in terms of inclusiveness. We invite everyone, we really hear their voices, and we'll try to integrate these voices into the process without compromising the needs of marginalized groups, let's say, or the groups that are not really heard in the decision-making processes. Trust is one of the key as well. So while talking trust, the transparency comes in. So the transparency in the process and the decision making, but also respecting the diversity is very key here, because not everyone might agree on the certain things, but it's also very important that we include all the voices and we try to respect this diversity, even though sometimes it doesn't align with our understanding of the issues. And finally, the legitimacy, that we should ensure that the outcomes represent all the stakeholders, so that are involved in the process. So we don't leave anyone behind that is involved in the process, and we try to have it very legitimate. And this key pillars in mind, in our project, we have 5 stages of the co-creation. And we see this process is also quite iterative, let's say. So far, we have done the first 2 stages to co-explore and co-diagnose. And in the next stages, we will be dealing with co-plan and co-evaluate, co-design. And the final stage on the governance aspect that I have mentioned is more on the co-develop. So in this today's webinar, I will be mostly reflecting on the first 2 stages that also align with our first workshop, and to share a little bit what we have learned so far and how we approached it. But before moving on, I also would like to share a little bit about how we approach in general to the co-creation process, because I think that if anyone deals with a stakeholder related projects, it's also very important that we also reflect a little bit on the process and also share what we have learned. So in our case, a little bit of a context, I'm working in the Geul Basin in the Netherlands, and that basin is heavily studied. So there are lots of projects going on. There are many student studies going on. So once we went there, we felt that the stakeholders were already very overwhelmed with what was going on in the basin. So therefore, our work was easy at one hand because people were used to working with others, but difficult on the other hand because everyone was very tired of another interaction. So we were thinking how to deal with it. And one approach was building on what is actually already existing. So the first thing what we did was we mapped out all the previous and ongoing initiative, and we tried to contact them and then coordinate efforts. Which also we realized helped a little bit also to the stakeholders, because once we also talked to them, we realized that they're also very lost with lots of projects, and some of them knew about one project, but other one didn't know about what was going on at the same time, which was very complementary, let's say. So we tried to also organize a little bit of a, let's say, small scale meetings with a stakeholder and bringing together different projects, and then to share what they have learned and how we can actually build on that. So that was quite important, what we realized, and also helped us a little bit. So we didn't reinvent the wheel, because most of the things that we were planning to do, let's say, there were already some basic work that have been done. So we could just basically build on the things that have already been done rather than starting from scratch, which could be very difficult. And before every stage, then we now aim to also explore what is already there, what kind of knowledge, resources that already there, so we can harvest. So that's one of the things that I think could be also relevant for others dealing with a stakeholder engagement. And another thing is, of course, to identify and understand the stakeholders. So the co-creation process is very much relying on the stakeholder selection and stakeholder identification, and having everyone on board. And the first stage is, of course, to understand who is actually involved and how they are connected. So, and I would also want to mention that this doesn't stay in the beginning of the project based on our experience, because some of the stakeholders, after some time, they either lose interest or they, let's say, lose interest in the topic, or they diversify their interest. Then once you approach them second time, they say that they cannot attend anymore. So it's very important that we also revisit our, let's say, stakeholder map again and again throughout the project, and to reflect and to see who are actually getting more power, who are getting more interest, who are getting more influential, who are getting less influential. So to revisit it and to reflect on the process, and to also adjust your stakeholder engagement and people who you invite to the workshops accordingly. So this is also a very important lesson we learned. And maybe another thing that I would like to highlight is it's also very important that we go beyond the usual suspects. So there are very prominent stakeholders once we talk about flood and drought in our case. So they will, of course, be very interested in the process. But there are also some stakeholders that are a little bit hidden. So they are not really involved in the stakeholder processes, or they are not very much involved in the decision making, but they are quite prominent. They either have expertise, they have resources that is key to the process. So we should also do an extra effort to reach out to them. And sometimes the design of let's say, stakeholder engagement is also key. So let's say we do a workshop, but it's a one-day workshop, but not everyone can attend this kind of workshops, right? So there are some people that has commitments, and one day is a big thing to ask for. So it's also very important that you diversify, let's say, stakeholder engagement or input collection mechanisms. So once you, let's say, for example, do a workshop, it's also important that you reach out to stakeholders that couldn't attend or cannot attend because of time restraints or other commitments, let's say, and try to ask their input in different way, either in bilateral setting, or asking online via email, or it could be different ways. So it's very important that we are also going beyond the usual suspects and try to make it beyond this one-off events. And finally, understanding what they need is also quite key. With this, I also would like to add another aspect, that once I was doing the stakeholder interviews for the mapping purposes, I also realized another important thing that would actually would have hindered the whole process, is the perception of stakeholders on the problem. So what I realized is that some of the stakeholders have different perception of nature-based solution, or the framing of nature-based solution, that if we use, let's say, oh, we are doing a workshop on the nature-based solution, that would actually hinder engagement of some stakeholders, because they have a very, let's say, bad reputation once we term nature-based solutions. So you need to be a little bit also careful with how you phrase certain solutions or certain problems once you reach out to certain stakeholders. So that's also what we realize, and this stakeholder engagement at the first stage also help us to understand how we should actually change our approach in the contacting the stakeholders. So that's another lesson we learned. And the final thing that in the co-creation process is, of course, we should engage with them iteratively. So that's also very key for the building trust, because, as I said, there are many projects and going on in the basin. Even if there is no project, if we want someone else to open up, we need some time for them to trust us and to trust the process, and to also feel like they are actually part of the process. So they are not just symbolically part of the process, but they are really shaping the process, shaping the research, and the research is also in line with their needs. So it's not something very top down that we tell them what to do, but we listen to what they know already, what they want to see, and we are more like a constructive rather than acting like they are the passive recipients, as I mentioned before. So this was a little bit on the how we approach the co-creation process. So in the first workshop, our main aim was two. First of all, to understand what kind of risks are there already in terms of flood and drought. And with risk, we of course has hazards, let's say flood and drought, but there were also certain causes and consequences. So if you look at the literature, of course, we can find list of causes and consequences of flood and drought. But once you talk to stakeholders, you actually realize that some of them are not really relevant for their needs. So in the first workshop, in the co-creation workshop, what we did was that we came up with a list of what we found in the literature and asked the stakeholders to put them in the impact webs. So on the left side, you can see the bit of a snapshot of the impact webs that we created together with the stakeholders. And we asked them to first of all work on the flood and then to work on the drought and also to identify what are the shared causes and consequences or shared drivers or how these two hazards are actually related to each other. And what we realized is that before approaching to the stakeholder, the flood was a very prominent discussed topic because of the 2021 event of a very big flood happened, and it was a very big impact, let's say. And people were very vocal about the flood, but the drought was a little bit hidden, so they didn't talk much about it, or they didn't really raise their concerns as much as flood. So what they realized is that these are actually connected. So there are shared drivers, there are shared let's say impacts. So that was very eye-opening for both for the stakeholders and for us to understand how this is more like actually these are very systemic risks that are very independent on each other. So especially for also understanding a little bit on the risks that are a little bit slow onset, or there are indirect impacts, or it's very difficult to see the impacts as let's say often as floods. So that was very helpful to come up with the impact webs together with the stakeholder to understand the risk, and also for them to see that these are not really separate issues, but they're really interconnected. And after we identified the risk, so the next step was to understand what kind of visions the stakeholders has. If we don't think about this risk, what kind of future they can envision. So we asked them to imagine themselves in 2050 and to imagine how the basin looks like actually. So, but before starting that, we, as I mentioned, the basin is very active right now, and there are many visions already out there. So the first step was we asked them to come up with their own pitch. So we realized that many of the stakeholder and organization already had their visions for future. So we asked them to actually pitch those, whoever they had. And then we asked other stakeholders to just make a note what they found quite common, what they found complementary to their visions, or what they found actually conflictual with their vision. After we have done this, then we started to ask them to go beyond the already existing visions to think about what else they want to see. And in the process, we also realized that some of the stakeholders didn't actually participate in the decision making, become super very enthusiastic about sharing their visions and to feel a bit, let's say, empowered to speak to others and to raise their concerns, because they sometimes some of the stakeholders are seen as a hindrance in the process, or they see a bit, they are seen a little bit of a problem, or they are perceived as they don't want to have certain measures in place. But what all other stakeholders saw that they have actually one vision. So they want to see a safe basin in the future that is safe from the flood and drought. And that was very, let's say, connecting for all of them. Respecting their differences, they see that they actually have one vision. So it was also very good for the stakeholders to actually listen to each other and actually build trust among each other as well. And so in the next step of our project, we will be building pathways, and we will really rely on these visions and try to capture those in our pathways. So that's the plan so far. And I would like to also share some now a bit of concluding remarks that could be really helpful. Was first of all, the systemic thinking really helps to unpack these interdependencies. So once we talk about the impact webs, as I mentioned, we realized that there are some hidden interdependencies across sectors, but also scales. So that was very helpful to unpack them together with the stakeholders, also for them to recognize some of the slow onset problems that is usually overlooked, such as drought issues in the basin that we realize maybe could be also relevant for the sandy soils or the salty soils. And another thing was that it also helped the stakeholders to encourage holistic understanding of the problem. So it's not just a easy solution, but there are different layers once we talk about the risk. And it's also very important that we understand it holistically rather than looking at having a tunnel vision, let's say. And for the visioning, so this helps us to focus on the context-specific values and priorities so that our pathways are really aligning with the needs of the people living there. So it's not like very top-down, but coming from a bottom-up. And also it help the stakeholders to have a collective imagination together and also feel a bit of a local ownership of the solutions that we're going to design. And finally, this local ownership and also collective imagination are very key for the long-term adaptation solutions. So if you don't have a really the ownership feeling, then the adaptation solutions are also cannot be sustained for a long term. And a little bit on the next step of the project. So now, as we have the visions and as we also have a current risk, we are planning to now identify future risks and then to validate it together with a stakeholder. And then with all this knowledge in mind, then we will be evaluating options, adaptation options, and then co-create pathways in accordance with the visions and risk identified. And finally, we will be mapping governance and also co-create recommendations for enhancement of the governance. So these are a little bit on the project, and I'm happy to hear what are your reflections, what you are thinking, how was your experience based on your stakeholder engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bilalova, for your insightful presentation. And now we will see that we have some questions. Yes, we have one question from Erin. And she asks, dear Shahana, could you post on our webpage the graphic used on your presentation? Would you like to prepare a short graphical abstract for the Sustain webpage? And
yeah,
the next,
sure. Yeah, I would be happy, but that would be quite nice. I will have a look at it, and thank you so much.
And we have another question from Ersin Atay. He says, congratulations on this nice presentation, Shahana. Excuse me if I missed it, may apologize. Could you please clarify when is this project expected to be completed? Which organization is funding it? Is it possible for researchers to join the project later on? Do you select new stakeholders or can individuals apply themselves? Thank you.
Yeah, so our project is expected to be ending in 2027. So that's the timeline, and it's funded by Water for All project. A partnership is co-funded by European Union Horizon, but we also have NWO as a co-funder. But this is only for the Dutch side because we also have a German and Italian partners that are co-funded by their own, let's say, co-funders. And for this, for the researcher to join for the project, probably yes, but so there are already let's say, work packages. So I'm happy also to share the project info, and if you feel like your research could be related to what we are doing, so we would be very happy to collaborate. Let's say for the new stakeholders and individuals to apply, I'm not very sure about this part because the stakeholders are quite specific. So we are only having stakeholders in the basin and the Geul Basin, so we don't have external stakeholders. And it was also, yeah, we try to reach out to all of them. Also, maybe to answer Karim Ben Hamed's question on who are our stakeholders. So we mainly have the stakeholders that is directly or indirectly relate to flood and drought issues. So they have a stake, let's say. We have landowners, we have government actors, we have private actors, let's say camping sites. So anyone that you think could be relevant to flood and drought issues. So that's our stakeholders, or there are also lots of nature organizations, both on the Dutch side, but the basin is transboundary. So we also have actors from German and Belgian sides, let's say. So this is a little bit on the stakeholders. So if the stakeholders and individuals are relevant for the basin, so we are also happy to have them on board from now on. As I said, the process doesn't end here. So we had our first workshop, but we are also actively trying to engage as many people in the basin as possible. I hope that answered your
Thank
question.
you. And we also have one question from Jaren. She asks, what kind of models do you use to identify the future risks?
That's a very good question. I am a social scientist, so I should be a little bit cautious here. In our basin, we are not actually using any models for identification of future risks, but Italian basin will do modeling actually. So in our case, we will be mainly trying to collect some input from the literature. So we are looking at the scenarios, climate scenarios. We will be looking at potential governance risks or social risks that might arise. So that's a little bit of our approach, and then we will be validating it together with a stakeholder. But in Italian case, they will be actually doing modeling. So it's a bit difficult for me to answer, let's say.
Well, thank you. Another question also from Diana. And she asks, thank you very much, Shahana. Very insightful presentation and very fitting to what I needed currently. My question is whether you encountered conflict between the stakeholders and how did you deal with that? And second, how do you keep stakeholders engaged and active? And finally, do you already have some adaptation measures in mind? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it's very inevitable that there are always conflicts, either big or small scale, let's say. In our case, there were also some conflicts among the stakeholders in terms of their approach to nature-based solutions. So that's a little bit of, I also mentioned that we were a little bit cautious to mention nature-based solution in our also invitation. So that was maybe one thing, small thing that we tried to do. And another thing was that in the workshop, we tried to have different voices, of course. And we were a little bit lucky because there were also some actors that were very much experienced that dealing with a different diversity of stakeholders. So we realized that they were also mediating a little bit on the tables that they were a part of. So that was another thing that we realized. But to be honest, before we started the workshop, we also asked everyone to first of all listen to each other and not to judge, and try to also try to have more like a collective work rather than to sideline certain interests. And once we realize, let's say that maybe one approach could be that if you realize there is actually some vocal actors that try to sideline some interests, so it would be maybe as a good practice to reach out to certain actors if you feel like their interest is not captured in the outcomes. You can have maybe bilateral meetings, or maybe to organize as a follow-up activity together with them. So for instance, in our case, the land owners were not very, like farmers, they were not very present in the workshop, but we had one representative of the farmer association, which was very good. But we were also advised that maybe we can have another meeting together with only with the farmers and to discuss it. So it's more like a safe space, let's say, for them. And then you still integrate their ideas, but you're not really try to avoid the conflict. So it's also very important that to have a conflict, but in a moderate way. So that would be my suggestion and what we did actually. And for keeping stakeholder engaged and active, it's a very difficult thing, especially in our case. As I mentioned, there are many activities going on. So we try to make it as aligning as possible. So we try to align with other activities and try to combine the workshops if possible, if they have. And if we see that it's not possible, we also try to offer stakeholders some other ways of providing their input. So as I said, having one-day workshop is maybe a little bit too much to ask from some people if it is like a private actors or if they have some other commitments. So we also try to collect their input through surveys, through interviews, so to keep it a little bit low key for them so they don't feel very overwhelmed, but we still try to collect their input with this. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, thank you. We have also another question, and Alexandra asks, thank you for your clear and very insightful presentation. I really appreciated learning about your approach. Sorry if I missed it, but could you share your reflections on which type of stakeholders were easier or more difficult to engage? Example, civil society, private sectors, etc. Whose voice end up stronger represented in your findings, or are they balanced?
Yeah, it's a very good question. What we realized is that nature organizations are very eager to be a part of the process. So they are also very active and they try to initiate some of the activities even. So that was what we realized. And for some government actors, so there is now ongoing project from the government side that is also working with nature-based solutions. So they were also very much engaged in providing inputs and providing comments on the process. So what that's also another thing we realized. But for instance, it was very difficult to reach out to farmers because our project has a nature-based solution in it, and some of the farmers were a little bit skeptic because they sometimes perceive nature-based solution as something like nature versus us. So that's also what we realized, that it's a little bit difficult to reach out to them and to involve them. But yeah, we tried still to frame it a little bit differently. So this helped a little bit. And also to convince them that it's not actually, so maybe also answering to Diana's last part of question, we don't have adaptation options measures in mind, but there are already things going on in the basin. So we are not really offering something novel. And we try to just evaluate them and to reflect on them together with the stakeholders to see if they are really fitting or not to the context, and to provide recommendations based on our analysis together with them. So that's to show that we are not really keeping aside, with certain actors, but try to be as unbiased as possible in our position. That was a little bit of our approach. And whose voices ended up stronger representing our findings? I would say that the voices of the stakeholders who were there was definitely represented a bit stronger. So we had many representatives from nature organizations, government officials, let's say, they were also aligning with the nature organizations in their approach more or less. We had only one representative from Farmer Association, even though he was quite good with conveying their own message, let's say. So that helped a little bit to balance it out. But now I'm in the process of reaching out to other actors who were not there, but who can still provide their inputs on the visions, on the risks identified. So we try to still collect the input of the people who didn't attend or who are a little bit skeptic, let's say. So that's a little bit to balance it out. But yeah, it's a bit difficult to have a very balanced position in the co-creation process because some actors are really prominent and they want to engage in the process. So you need to really do extra effort to reach out to others and try to bring their voices as well in.
Yeah, thank you very much for your detailed answers. And now I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Tiwari, who will present her work on the ecosystem services valuation of coastal dunes and Northwest Ireland.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So my presentation, I'll try to keep it shorter. I will just share my screen. So I hope, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the title is Cost-Benefit Analysis or Ecosystem Service Valuation of sand dunes, coastal sand dunes in Sligo County, which is in Northwest Ireland. So I don't know if you know the map of Ireland, but it's on the Atlantic coast, just above Galway, if you know Galway. So this study essentially had 3 different components to it. The first step was to determine area gain and loss and future projections of shoreline erosion on the 3 beaches. So we had 3 case study sites within Sligo County, and we tried to determine how much area has been gained and lost over the last 20 to 25 years. I will, in a moment, share some maps as well. The second step was to build ecological maps of the 3 study sites through fieldwork. So we had local ecologists and also local reports from like local government organizations, like GIS data. And we built these ecological maps to try and study the connection between like ecological components and the erosion that was occurring. For instance, some parts of the beach may be more prone to erosion because of, like more wave intensity on that part of the beach or something like that. So we tried to also map that out. And the third step, which was the main objective of the study, was to gather data on the costs of dune management and the monetary benefits from dune management. So for the costs, that was quite easy, as you can imagine, because there were local reports from the local government on the costs over the last 20 years. And we just basically used that data. For the monetary benefits, we did a really comprehensive secondary literature review. And we basically looked at 3 key ecosystem services. So that includes coastal protection offered by the dunes, carbon capture, and recreational value. And these 3 ecosystem services were actually selected through a participatory stakeholder workshop. So we actually worked with the local stakeholders to determine which kind of ecosystem services. And also we did actually select dune management as our focus, also in collaboration with local stakeholders. So yeah, we did a workshop basically to select the nature-based solution that the stakeholders want to have more data on, or yeah, they wanted us to work on. So these were the 3 key steps. As you can see, there's a table there. And we found that the cost benefit ratio was basically the benefits were nearly 7 times higher than the cost. So that was obviously a really good sign. The main benefit came from coastal protection. As you can see in the table, there were also high benefits from recreation. And the benefits were slightly lower from carbon capture. The reasoning for this is that dunes as a system, not all of the dunes actually capture carbon, only the vegetated parts of the dunes tend to capture carbon. So they're usually called fixed dunes. And usually they have vegetation like marram grass, which is typical on dunes in that region of Ireland. So they tend to capture carbon, and maybe only 30% of the dune is vegetated, or 50%, not all of the dunes are vegetated. So that's why the carbon capture tends to be lower. And obviously, the dunes are not as good at carbon capture as some other habitats, for instance, wetland or peatland. So it's, yeah, the carbon capture potential is slightly lower, but we were still interested to look at that because actually not a lot of studies in Ireland have determined the carbon capture potential of dunes. And I will go into each of the ecosystem services and the methodology we used in the next slides. So starting with the ecological mapping, you can see here our 2 study sites, so Strandhill Beach and Strida. Like I said, we used GIS data, but then we also did field work, and it's quite detailed, so it may not be entirely visible, but as you can see, we tried to determine the kind of dunes. So on Strandhill, you can see there's different varieties. For instance, humid dune slacks, dunes with creeping willow, fixed gray dunes, marram white dunes, embryonic shifting dunes. So there's a lot of different categories of dunes. And we use the Natura 2000 framework to determine this. And then obviously the GIS data as well. And then with the ecologists, we actually looked into which parts of the dunes are maybe most impacted by climate change, most impacted by human anthropogenic impact. So you can see on Strand Hill, there's a region with a lot of these different dots. And a lot of them are, let's say, this caravan park, or like cafes and restaurants, or regions where maybe humans go out camping, and maybe those regions are more prone to erosion because they tend to trample on the dunes, and they tend to be affected by human traffic. Whereas some areas of the dune where I'm pointing now, they tend to be more better preserved because not many humans go maybe that far out. But then they could be affected by natural processes because maybe they're exposed to more wind and wave pressure and things like that. So as part of our modeling, we used satellite data, but also we tried to do a regression model with wind wave data and sea level rise data, just to try and make it more comprehensive. So this was the ecological mapping. In the next slides, you can see the satellite imaging that I was mentioning. So we looked at historical data between 2003 to 2024. And as you can see, the area in red is the loss. So there's been a huge amount of loss on Strand Hill. We also had numbers. So in the box on the left, you can see some of the numbers. And then we also did future mapping. So we did it for 2034 and 2044. And as you can see, we found there's going to be more erosion. So we tried to do future projections and then also calculate the monetary values based on this data. I'm also sharing data for the other two beaches. So Strida and Enniskroon beaches. Sorry, those names are really Irish. So they're a bit hard to pronounce maybe. But basically we found that Strida Beach had accretion, interestingly, and then in the future it was showing erosion. And the opposite for Enniskroon Beach, they had erosion, but they were showing future accretion. So we also tried to work with the ecologists to try and determine why these patterns were happening and try and find like a robust, scientifically robust solution. But I don't think we didn't have enough data to actually, look at the whole comprehensive picture, but we tried to use assumptions on why these processes were happening. So again, we used historical data and we used future projections until 2044. Now coming to the monetary valuation. So as you can see, these are really detailed tables. So for coastal protection, essentially what we did, I'll go back to the previous slide. So we gathered the data on the area loss and the future area loss and gain as well. And then we tried to essentially multiply that with the costs of sand dune replenishment. So we gathered those costs from secondary literature, and then we multiplied the exact area. So for instance, in these slides, we have the area exactly in meters square, and then we multiplied it by the cost per meter square of dune replenishment. So we picked this methodology from a very robust study that was done in Belgium. And we also looked at a lot of other studies. So a lot of studies mostly focused around Europe because we wanted to limit our case study areas, and we wanted it to be similar to our study area in Ireland, just to ensure that the benefit transfer is meaningful and it's not too much based on assumption. So this is the area change historically for coastal protection for the dunes, as you can see, and the future area change as well. So we calculated it for each of the study sites. It's in meter squares. And then based on that, we determined the value change in euros, also for historically and for future erosions until 2044. And then we used the discount rate just to make sure that our assumptions for the future were accurate. So as you can see, it's quite a big amount, especially for Strand Hill and also for Strida. For Enniskroon, there's relatively less. area change, and a lot of it is actually accretion, which is really a good sign. So this is because Enniskron Beach actually has the healthiest dune system of all the 3 beaches. So you could almost argue that dunes do help protect the beach, because we found clear indication that Strandhill had the most eroded dunes, and it was the most beach with the most area loss, whereas Enniskron Beach had accretion because of how healthy the dunes were and how large the dune area was. So yeah, we did find some evidence of that, which was quite interesting. And this data is actually like the first of its kind in this region of Ireland, or maybe even in all of Ireland, because not a lot of studies exist like this. So a lot of the local municipalities and local stakeholders have told us that they find it quite useful. The next table, as you can see, is on carbon capture. So the dune area has been shared below. So we only took the part of the dune that is basically the part of the beach that is dune. So for coastal protection, we looked at the entire beach, whereas for carbon capture, we only looked specifically on the dune area. And we determined the values. So for this study, we used secondary data as well from available literature on carbon sequestration from dunes. And we used 3 main studies as our literature sources for the benefit transfer. And then we determined the dune area change in the future, also until 2044, and the value change. So as you can see, these values are not as high as the coastal protection. This is because the monetary value of carbon sequestration per square meter is quite low from dunes, as we determined from our literature search. So that's why it's a very small monetary benefit. And I explained a bit earlier why dunes tend to sequester less carbon, and that's why this value was a bit lower. But it was still an interesting finding for us, because like I mentioned, not a lot of data exists on this in Ireland. So it was good for us to see, how much is approximately the monetary value from carbon capture. And then moving on to the next slides, if you have questions, please feel free to ask me later and I will be happy to answer. So the last one is recreation. So we actually tried to determine the average number of visitors to the beach in the county, so across the 3 sites. And we used also a lot of secondary data. We used the tourism board numbers, we used the local county council figures, and then we arrived at this. We also used some studies that were focused on Ireland, that mentioned the distribution or the percentage of beach visitors across the year. So as you can see, we have more numbers in summer and less numbers in winter. And yeah, so this is an average, but it is also like a pretty good picture for starters, because we don't have this data existing for this region of Ireland. It's not being monitored, unfortunately. So we had to do it on our own from scratch, which took a lot of work, as you can imagine. But then we've been told it's also quite useful locally. So in the table, you can see the actual visitors per year, which is slightly different for the different beaches based on the number of visitors they attract, roughly. You can see the values in euros. So the values are quite high. And we determine the values based on the willingness to pay assigned by each visitor to each beach visit. So I think it was roughly around 8 euros, if I remember correctly. And then we multiplied it with the number of visitors, which we calculated ourselves. So this was roughly the approximate value. Obviously, it's not entirely accurate because it's assumptions. That's why we give a range here. But it's good to start with, because again, not a lot of studies have done this in this region. We also tried to determine potential visitor numbers. We use something called the beach carrying capacity, which is another concept from different studies. So essentially, it looks at how many visitors should be at the beach at any given time based on like environmental sustainability. And essentially, we determined that there should be one visitor per 7 meters square, and then based on the area of the beach, we calculated the numbers that should be there. So we had two different figures, the actual visitor values from the reports and then the potential visitors, just to make sure that our data was comprehensive and we had roughly similar numbers. And then we basically multiplied it by the willingness to pay. We had the discount rate for the future. And as you can see, we have some figures there. So also from recreation, we found that there's a lot of monetary value or revenue generated on the beaches, including from the dunes themselves. So that was a very useful finding. Good to know, because we realized that a lot of visitors do visit the dunes for camping and other recreational purposes, and they do add aesthetic value to the beach as well. So I think that's the last slide. I didn't want to go too much into detail because, as you can see, it's quite a technical study. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. This research was done as part of my PhD. But we do have a preprint version available online. So in the preprint version, if you can still see my screen, we have recommendations. So exactly what kind of dune management practices should be used, like sand trapping, soil inversion, beach management practices that should be used, like beach width, policy recommendations. So we have a lot of recommendations which our local stakeholders have also found quite useful. But it's not a published paper yet. But if you'd like to see, it is available online. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari, for your presentation. It's a great research. And now let's see if we have any question. I think there's no question. You can write your questions. Feel free to use the chat. Okay, I want to ask a question. My field is remote sensing. So did you use remote sensing? If so, which satellite imagery or remote sensing techniques did you use to monitor changes in the coastal dune system over time?
We used DSAS, it's digital shoreline analysis. And also we created digital elevation models. And then we used multiple regression with the sea level rise data and the wind wave data to determine, how they are also impacting the dunes. So we had a combination of different methodologies. And for the exact data, we used Copernicus data for the satellite imaging.
Sentinel. Yeah. Okay, thank you. No questions? Okay.
It was quite a technical study.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. We have one from Diana. Thank you very much for sharing your study and methodology. Could you share the study with the recommendations, please?
Sure, yeah. If you'd like the link, I can share the link. Again, it's not a published paper, so please take it with a pinch of salt, but yeah, we have it as a preprint. So I hope you can see the link.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you very much to both of our speakers, Dr. Shahana Bilalova and Dr. Tiwari, for their excellent presentation. Dr. Kate, if you want to say something.
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting presentations, and I guess a lot of follow-up questions that we can also discuss further. I would like also to let everyone know that we will continue with our webinar series later in the autumn, actually on the 4th of September, when we will talk more about the topic of community-led stakeholder engagement for adaptive livelihoods. Thank you very much for joining us today. We wish you a good rest of the week ahead and also a good summer break. And big thanks to our speakers and organizers, Zenepe and Syed as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.